So good morning. Welcome to our next in our series of webinars of LSEC, the cybersecurity experts from home. On the Thursday morning, that's usually everything in relation to the Identity and Access Management series. We had already quite a number of interesting talks over the last couple of weeks, ranging from a vision on the future of Identity and Access Management to how to best deal with the different offerers of Identity and Access Management platforms and systems, to authentication in the cloud environment and how that really needs to work towards the customer-centric view. And today we'll be thinking a little bit about the rules that apply in this specific space of Identity and Access Management and how that will also continue towards the future. So thanks for joining. My name is Hendrik. I'm the managing director of a not-for-profit association based out of Belgium, which is called LSEC. And LSEC has been around for quite a number of years, trying to bring the community of experts together and trying to improve on cybersecurity from all different aspects. Over the last couple of years, we have seen the aspect of identity and access increasing quite significantly, specifically because, amongst others, identity theft and the way that malicious actors are using or abusing our identities is really a cause for concern, and specifically a cause for concern in terms of cybersecurity. Only recently, also, one of our accounts got hacked in PlayStation environment, and then we start asking around within PlayStation environment, and then that seems to be quite a normal thing to happen there. So one would wonder, or should wonder, how do these things happen, and why did this happen? Because there's so many different technologies and systems available to support this. But even also, this is a perspective from Microsoft over the 2018 figures. But they saw an increase in 2018 to 2019, 300% increase in identity attacks only on Azure. So taking that and moving that fast forward, we'll see a doubling happening in only in this year, knowing that especially also during Corona crisis and during the current increase speed of digitalization, there needs to be much more done in terms of identity and access as an infrastructure. So that is the reason why we also put it back on top of our agenda. Identity and access is not an easy thing to do. It requires quite a lot of understanding of your own organization and how to also deal with the different roles and responsibilities. But luckily, I would say, since the arrival of the cloud, it's becoming much easier to integrate, and many of the things that we need to care about in the past, we can actually also outsource and see identity as a service popping up quite fast. So that's also the reason why we investigate in our environment into potential new innovations. And earlier this week, we had an interesting call together with China Mobile, who presented their 5G deployments specifically for industry. And as you can see here, also in the domain of 5G, identity is continuing to become a much stronger element of also authenticating to mobile networks. Specifically because in 5G, cybersecurity is increasing quite significantly in terms of its feature capabilities and good as well. So ACMA is a new model of authentication that combines both SIM or even no SIM together with what is happening on the enterprise side. We'll be definitely talking much more about these things later on. As you might know, LSEC is quite involved into industrial domains, and since some years we've been starting to investigate the cybersecurity for robotics, for instance, which is part of a larger program. And not so long ago, we also investigated one of the components there, so the identity and access level to robots. And this is mainly true for industrial robots, but it actually applies to any type of robot. So considering the use of robots all over the place, and definitely in manufacturing environments, also under the new result of the lockdown, we have seen quite a number of factories picking up the agility on implementing robots much easier and much faster, but without really taking into consideration how those systems will need to be integrated with the rest of the environment And so that makes it quite easy for many of the traditional industrial robots to hack into with almost none to only very meager types of identity and access controls or authentication mechanisms. So definitely something to look into, and we'll be looking into this much more from our cybersecurity for robotics perspective. Which brings me a bit to what we do within LSEC. Within LSEC, we try to combine the expertise available within cybersecurity and bring that to many different vertical markets. We offer also some funding for this. For instance, through the Trinity project, we had an open call specifically for agile manufacturing, but in there, there's also quite a number of components in relation to cybersecurity. So innovators working into agile manufacturing, please be welcome to join in and support that, that domain. And we'll be happy to guide you there because that's one of our goals. So innovation with cybersecurity, with identity and access in many different domains. And so we apply this in projects, but we apply this also to knowledge sharing and expertise sharing. And that's the reason why we organize these webinars and organize otherwise real life events where we try to promote these types of activities. So we have an industrial side next to the cybersecurity component, which also includes, in this case, the promotion of digitalization of factories. And in that space, specifically, as you can imagine, we are working very much into trying to integrate as much as possible of identity and access. Which brings me to the topic of today. Hendrik, good morning. Thanks for joining in, and thanks for wanting to participate in our webinar series. Making the new rules stick. You at least draw our attention to the fact that there's some new rules, and we have to abide to something like an ID&AM culture. But what does that really mean, and why do we need to care about it in the next coming future? So I'm going to hand over the floor to you. Please indulge us a bit with the reasoning behind this, and also why within PWC you're covering this.
All right, be happy to.
There you go. We can see your screen and we can see you.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone. My name is Hendrik Parmentier. I am the security culture lead for the PWC cyber and privacy team. I have a background in training and the people side of security, both physical and digital. Now, before I begin for the following presentation, I would like to specifically thank Sven Pauwels, who is also attending, and whom you heard last month on the rat race to modern identity access management. He's been a great help for guidance and gave me a couple of very nice examples, which I could then use to bring things to life. Now, in the first part, I will discuss the basics of human behavior and their resilience to change. And in the second part, I will use the user's perspective to demonstrate how you can make people adopt new technology and, as it's relevant for identity and access management, new rules. User adoption has always been underlighted when it comes to identity and access management. And the reason behind this is because, in a nutshell, we tell people what to do and what not to do. And it's not like we're offering them much choice in the matter. So frankly, within these disciplines, user adoption and awareness are just not that high on our list of priorities. So let me start off with this first statement. People hate being told what to do. And then followed by the inconvenient truth about the access management industry, we tell people what to do. And it's very easy to just leave it at that, because you could say the whole idea is to not leave people the choice. You get access to the things you need, and you don't get access to what you don't need. So if you're not happy about that, then that's a shame. And to a certain extent, that's true. Not leaving any margin for failure or data leaks is the whole point. But this is people we're working with, and as we all know, they don't come with a command line. So let me use the real world example from the time when I worked at a previous employer, and it's actually about physical security. And I have worked in both industries, and they are basically the same. It's all about opening and closing doors. And only our doors are both really small and really huge at the same time. Now, this was about 10 years ago, and physical access management has evolved since then as well, but I'm sure you can relate to this. Oh, not the correct slide. Yep. So, this is one of the buildings I used to work in, and there was a new badge system in place. It had the right idea. The organization was a security company, so obviously there needed to be some restrictions on who could go where within the building, and the new badge policy was entirely built around that. And it did hold water, at least in theory. And I've used my brilliant drawing skills to illustrate the following. This was also, sorry?
That's not too bad.
my daughter specifically asked to put in a bird. It's on the right side of the drawing. This was around the same time it got widely accepted that smoking within the office was simply a no-go. And so that they built this beautiful designated smoking area somewhere in front of the building. It was really close to the road. It was dark. It was dreary. It was nice for about 2 weeks, and then got vandalized, as you can see in the picture. It's somewhat representative. Now, on the south side of the building, to the right, was a nice little company garden. There were colored bushes and a bench for people to sit, have their lunches on. So, surprise, surprise, where did all the smokers go? Well, exactly. Everybody, of course, chose the nice sun-facing side of the building to have their smokes. And never mind that there were no ashtrays there, and that in summer it was a huge fire hazard. The fact that there was no lighting in the evenings, nor any camera monitoring on that side of the building, that probably just added to the appeal. Now, you could go out the main entry and pass around the building to reach that spot. And the main entry, obviously, everybody had access to that. But let's face it, that was not what happened. There was a side door on the building. And that side door was only accessible by senior members of staff, and they had their car parked at the back so they could use that particular door, and the rest couldn't. Now, in theory, badge rights were restricted to only use the front door for most people. Now, in practice, senior staff took the side entrance to have their smokes, and obviously they took along colleagues to have their smokes with, because it's more fun in a group, right? So higher management was also not really open to having their badges restricted. They didn't want to walk around the whole building twice a day. This is something we probably also recognize. And the problem was that when the director was done with his smoke and he left either inside the building or just took his car, he left the door open for the people that weren't done with their smoke yet, because we are polite. And more often than not, the last one to leave did not close the door. So they tried mitigating that by installing a weighted system so the door would close by itself and not pose a huge security issue for the rest of the building. But then out of nowhere, all of a sudden, a wooden peg appeared, and they used that to block the door from closing. And it got left open again. And then the wooden peg was taken away, and then they put a big angry sign there explaining that that was not how it was supposed to be done. So without the peg, people just used the fire extinguisher to keep the door open, which then mitigated any potential fire hazards in summer, as I mentioned before. But what it did also do was obviously leave the door open for people who had no right to be inside the building. So what is the central problem here? The new way of working didn't appeal. And people either did not appreciate or understand the security risks it brought along. Now, while a decent identity access management, privilege access management rollout blocks out a lot of workarounds and ways users can be passive aggressive about things, it still remains vulnerable, especially during the rollout. The rollout itself is vulnerable. Turning a blind eye towards the people side of things could spell doom for the results of your project, the success of your project even. And there is an abundance of very creative ways in which users can and will retaliate against being told what to do and how to do it. Something with the order of my slides that went a little long. So they might protest quietly, and even though that might sound as the nicest option for protests, it kind of is pretty bad. It will give people that are already toxic about usually completely unrelated things extra ammo to turn things sour on the work floor. And while this resentment might not directly influence the rollout of your projects, it is really bad for the organization in itself. And passive protest leads to lower productivity, reduction of staff retention, absence, all other kinds of nastiness. So what we do on an IT level is going to influence the people side of the organization very profoundly. And the next one, and that one we probably already know, having done this, is that they might protest loudly. And you might have already had this happening, for instance, the unions that aren't convinced that this whole restriction thing is to the best interest of their people. And this might lead to your plans just being bluntly pointed towards the recycle bin. If the protest is loud enough, your project might get blocked and cancelled. Another option is that they might find some sort of workaround, and if your organization is not equipped to monitor shadow IT, your workforce might have a very creative, or they develop a very creative assembly of storage and backup storage and obscure collaboration tools you never even heard of, and that you obviously don't know and then don't control, which would be disastrous for the information security of your organization. Or they might leave if they interpret the changes as a lack of faith or trust. And this is quite important within what we do, because we take away a part of the faith and trust factor. It's like we're not leaving people much choice. And faith and trust is, according to Harvard Business Review, one of the top 5 reasons good employees stay, and when it's not there, they leave. So if you're not going to communicate well around this, you might give people the idea that the grass is greener somewhere else, which is obviously not the point. So that brings us to why people refuse to adopt or resist new ways of working. And most of it boils down to fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Am I going to understand these new procedures I have to adhere to? Am I going to look foolish if I have to ask how things work? And then one that we all heard a lot: what if I need something in a hurry and I can't reach it? So people are going to resist these changes when you're rolling out identity and access management. People don't like change. This is one of the big reasons. They really don't like change. They don't like the unexpected, and that's important. People might like change if it becomes expected. If it's unexpected, if you didn't communicate well beforehand, that's going to be a problem. And this resistance against change isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, being selective about what new stuff people are going to adopt guarantees that people have time, energy, and focus to do the jobs that they are supposed to do. And there's only so much hours in a day, and you can't spend too much of that rethinking what you're doing. So this is actually a very normal and very human and very functional type of resistance. You're going to have to overcome it, though. Secondly, people really don't like being monitored. I don't like being monitored. It makes people self-conscious, makes them second guess themselves. If they're insecure about their work, they might fear being reprimanded, or if they're really insecure about their jobs, they might fear being laid off. That is also going to be a problem, and one of the core reasons why people would resist the idea of having to adhere to new rules. Thirdly, and this is a really important one to those very particularly difficult people within the organization that are going to give the most resistance at the beginning and the rollout of your project, is that people really don't like being allowed less. Everything is about power. There are sociologists that say that every form of communication has something to do with the establishment of power. And now people are in a situation where they used to be able to do something, and now they can't do that anymore. And this restriction is about the most important pass coin of humanity, this power. And even if they don't need that particular power, that particular access right to some database or an information bank they never use, losing the ability to exert that power or being able to brag about it, if it is going to feel like losing power. It's a bit like taking someone's function title and removing the senior word in front of it. And even if it doesn't affect the wage or the job content, people are going to feel like something was taken away from them. And that's going to breed resistance. So I guess most of what I'm saying here might sound very irrational, might sound very arbitrary, but remember, this is people we're working with. And because being rational all the time is not really what defines us as species, I think the irrational part might usually be a good thing. And we're also going to use that to adopt changes and the new rules and make people happy about the project you're doing. So we've now looked at how people resist change and why they resist that change. Now let's look at why people adopt that change. First reason is that if they get the feeling that this is really going to help their job, they will adopt it. And ways to make things faster and easier usually work best. People want to be fast and people want stuff to be easy. However, this requires people understanding how something works, which means you will have to dedicate time and resources into making sure they get a good explanation. And this is going to be a bit of the gist throughout my presentation here. You're going to have to invest to people in order for your project to work the best way it possibly can. Also, knowing why something is being implemented will go a long way. Even if it doesn't help the person directly, understanding why a measure was taken for the greater good of the organization will help you get a decent amount of people on board. Again, this requires some investment in explaining things, and it mostly involves being very honest, very honest about things to the point of vulnerability. If you're rolling out an identity and access management program because you had a serious data breach causing intellectual property, you're going to have to be honest about the nature and the extent of the incident and the damage. If you say, yeah, but it wasn't a big thing, and then afterwards you roll out this big IAM project, it is going to bite you in the rear end afterwards. People are going to say, well, I thought it wasn't that serious. Why am I being restricted now? And the last reason why people adopt change, and I promise this will be your go-to solution if you're having troubles, is because it makes the user look good or feel nice. The thing that usually works best might not be the most rational thing. So try to make it sexy. Obviously, this is going to be a challenge, but try. Going back to my example of the smoking booth in the front of the building, why was nobody using that? It was because it wasn't the nicest place to have a smoke. Had it been the nicest place to have a smoke, nobody would have been bothered with the wooden peg or chasing the boss around with his badge. I'll give you an example at the very end of this presentation as a pointing case on what does work. Now, there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to making your workforce not only execute, but adopt behavior change. Now, let's look at, you've already seen it flash by, another one of my artistic expressions. So this chart is a very old one. You've probably seen it before in some form or shape. It's from a famous study published in 1959. It's from Bourne and Arbor. The work was very bombastically called the Foundation for Research on Human Development. However, time did prove it to be exactly that, and it's become a staple for behavioral studies everywhere. Now, let's resist the temptation to look too hard at the red parts. We know the red parts are going to be our problem. Let's not focus on that yet. This chart gives an overview on when your target workforce is going to adopt the changes and the new rules you are giving them, and who is going to do that in that particular phase. So you've got a new project, you're going to roll it out, you're starting to explain to the workforce that access rights are going to be, I'm going to use the word restricted. There might be more positive phrases you could use there, but that's basically going to be the message. The first ones to adopt a new idea and a new way of working will be the innovators. And we love the innovators. I mean, at first glance, it is the exact opposite of a problem. And with these guys, you just have to mention the remote possibility of something new, and they will jump right on board and start promoting it within the organization. Now, this does seem like a boon, but be careful. These people have probably jumped on earlier unrelated innovations, and you have no idea on how those turned out. So they might have some damaged credibility on that level. Being an innovator is sometimes a character trait. So they might not always be the most respected people in the organization when it comes to innovation. And they might come with a label of overenthusiasm, naivety, impulsivity. Now, these are going to be, in any case, your very early ambassadors, and you will want to use these. But make sure that the first information you are spreading out is very concise, 100% correct, and very easy to understand. Because people with a short attention span, and most people have very short attention spans, they tend to quickly grasp a concept and fill in the blanks themselves, undermining the credibility of your project in the long run. You'll get comments like, oh, but I thought it was differently. You first said this. No, that's what you made of it. But this is very natural and very human for people to do. So take care that these innovators are fully informed. And I do not mean to say that all of these innovators are jumpy iconoclasts, only that they might be perceived by the rest of the organization as exactly that. So help them conquer that. On the other hand, these people will also be very forgiving of setbacks or drawbacks. So these are going to be your fans. And why are they going to do that? Because they're already invested. If they're invested, they're going to be very forgiving. Secondly, the early adopters. And when it comes to choosing your champions in the organization to get a new idea across, to get your ID&AM project across, to get across the fact that people are going to be herded into groups with certain access rights, and that was different from before. You might be tempted to choose your champions from the innovator group because they're going to be the earliest to jump on board. However, these early adopters are going to be the actual influencers within the organization. These are people that are a little more careful. They're usually very respected for their innovative decisions. And very often they are going to be either the formal or informal leaders within a prospering organization. Let's turn it around. If your early adopters are not the influencers of your organization, the organization is probably not going to prosper. Now, these early adopters have been watching those innovators, and they got curious, or they got at least open to the new idea and the new rules. And they also know that they have a good name when it comes to promoting new ideas, so they will be careful to risk it. But they will think critically for themselves and adopt new rules and ideas if they tick off at least one of the 3 boxes I mentioned earlier before. If it either helps your job, themselves at their jobs, if it helps the organization, or if it helps them look good. These people are generally seen as being closer to the rest of the workforce, apologies, and make things feel less alien. I mean, if he or she is doing it, it's probably going to be a good idea, right? That's how it works. So these early adopters will want to be informed. They will want to be convinced, and some extra effort is going to be required to get to them. And once you have their attention, use it well. Explain it, leave some important details in it, and explain the general idea and how it works. Explain how it will serve the worker, the organization, or themselves. You should maybe not explicitly mention the fact how it's going to make them look sexy. They're going to make that decision themselves. But a good way of getting their attention is to involve them in a test group by making them feel special, making them feel privileged, And I know this really sounds horrible, but I'll clarify later on with an example. I'm going to move along on the chart here. You've got the early majority up next, and that is the last part of the easy half of your workforce. All this together should be around 50%, 49%. This early majority is going to follow the early adopters because they believe it's the best way forward. And you're still going to have to inform them, but you can be more concise. A Reader's Digest version of what you gave to the early adopters is probably going to be enough. On the other hand, you might want to use some diverse, creative, playful ways of presenting the information because this is going to be a very, very diverse group. Moving on to the late majority, that's also going to be a very diverse group. And they're going to be more skeptical than the previous group, and they might need some extra convincing. And now we're talking about convincing, not informing. Obviously, they're going to have to be informed, but you're going to have to sell it as well. Now, a lot of this selling the idea is going to happen by itself through peer pressure from the previous groups, and seeing that the rules that you've installed are actually for the better, that they're not bothering anyone, and that they are facilitating the progress. So these people are going to wait and sit it out and say, okay, this might be good. I'm very skeptical right now. And then after a couple of months, things seem to be working fine. It's like, okay, might as well adopt it. To speed things up, you might need some active information campaigning, maybe a speaker slot in the team meetings, sometimes even informal face-to-face talks to get this part on board. And the more actively you're going to invest in this group, the smaller the percentage in the last group. Note that this late majority is suspicious of change itself, not as much as you as the person that announces the change and makes it happen, the change agent. So there's still a lot of goodwill here. Moving on to the last part, the laggards. These people will actively resist embracing change. And the reasons can be diverse, such as an unwillingness to adapt right before, I don't know, maybe because they're going to leave the organization, they're going to retire, I'm not going to adapt right now anymore. Or maybe they have a vested interest in the way things were done before. Maybe they had access everywhere, and that is going to be heavily restricted. And some of these are just going to be plain scared of change. Now, these laggards will base their decisions on how things were done. That's how they usually decide new things, like how was it done? It was done like that. Okay, then that is exactly how I'm going to do it in the future. So this decision-making strategy is simply not going to serve them anymore. They're going to be very wary of the change itself, and more often than not, they're also going to be wary about the change agent. So that's you. You're going to get feedback like, you don't know what it is to do my job. Be mindful of these people, don't judge, since you won't know where this response is coming from. And bear in mind that even you could be an innovator in one thing and a laggard in another. Just for instance, when it comes to redecorating my home or the office, I'm usually the innovator. Wow, that looks cool, let's do that. But for instance, when it came to the adoption of mobile phones, I was definitely a laggard. As a student, I hated the idea of being reachable everywhere. I loved just falling away from the radar. So the lady that would later be my ex-wife just bought one at some point, and she made me use it. And I'm not saying that that was the reason that we divorced, but I might be saying it was one of the many little things that didn't help. Anyway, 19-year-old Hendrik adopted the Nokia 3320, I believe it was, that gray and blue one. And I didn't adopt it because I could then be reached everywhere, because I still actually don't really like that. But it had the snake game on it, and I had to wait for the bus a lot, and that gave me something to do. So maybe try to find a way in that works for that particular person. It's going to be a small group. But that small group is going to be your toughest nut, and you're going to have to sell it. There's not just one way of doing that. Some people might need to know all the details behind the technology, or they might want to know all the details about how the decision-making progress was in handing out the particular access rights people have, or why they got restricted. They might need to know why. Others might have a vested personal interest against the new rules. This is going to have to be addressed. This is people that maybe are abusing the accesses that they have. Maybe these are the people that are the biggest reason for your organization to decide that an IAM implementation is necessary. You're going to have to address that. And as stated earlier, everybody hates being told what to do. It is, however, an option. Telling somebody, well, this is just the way it is and you're going to have to do it, but use it as the final option. Just make sure you tried everything else first. Now, there are different ways of identifying these different adoption players, which will influence the way you're going to approach them. There's not a hard and fast rule. Doesn't take into account the people that have an active interest in leaving things as they are, but there are certain trends you can take along. The innovators are going to be very active communicators. They talk to a lot of people all the time. Your early adopters, they have a good network within the organization. They use it often. They use it thoughtfully. Laggards, on the other hand, they are often quite isolated in their function, might have a very repetitive task that keeps them under the innovation radar until now, obviously. And recognizing these groups is going to help you to predict where the problems and where particular problems are going to rear their heads. Make sure you have addressed and informed these groups adequately, as much as you can even, before you start restricting access. Just bear in mind that anything you didn't do beforehand will cost twice the effort afterwards. Because apart from people hating being told what to do, there's only one thing they hate even more, and that's, hold on, scrolling down. People hate being confronted with a fait accompli, a done deal. Now, when getting the idea sold, use the communication channels the organization already has. Have the communication and marketing departments help you. Is there a digital upskilling program in the organization? Latch onto it. Is this organization used to e-learnings? Then make a brief one detailing why information security is important to the organization and how identity and access management fits into that. Or better yet, just add an extra chapter to maybe a mandatory training within the organization, maybe add it to the induction for new joiners, and use your early adopters to spread the message, preferably with a high profile senior management function, because that simply draws more followers. But make sure you reach everyone and make it sexy. Sell it by explaining why the new rules are better, what the benefits are. You of all people know what the benefits are, obviously. It's faster, you can use single sign-on, it's quicker, it's easier to give a new hire or somebody that got a promotion all the necessary access rights they then need, and make sure to emphasize it's safer. And even though for us that might be the most important reason, I mean, it's a security thing. Why would you be against that? Don't bet everything you have on that, because, and I stole this particular line from Carol Theriot from Smashing Security. Here's the truth. Most people find info security boring as... I would just add to that some nuance. Unless they had a big security breach in the news recently, then all of a sudden adoption is going to go a little faster, because nothing beats a good crisis when it comes to catalysts. Now, one last example where I would like to distill the whole point I've been trying to make here is, and this is the example I stole from my colleague Sven I mentioned earlier. It was just too good not to use. So the goal we had was to roll out a single sign-on solution within a large organization. This technology filled in usernames and passwords using the employee badge. And there was a small unobtrusive badge reader that came along with it that people would then have to use. It was a pretty great solution. It allowed roaming. It was very adaptive to the different types of work, and was very adaptive to the workplaces the workforce used. However, the organization had some history of failed attempts to adopt new technology. But the implementation started rather well, and there was a pretty decent amount and quality of internal communication about this new device that would make everyone's life so much easier, because everybody hates having to change their passwords, etc., etc. This is also going to be safer. But when it came to testing, volunteers were asked, and nobody raised their digital hand. So the question was asked again, and again, nobody stirred. And we get this. I mean, we all have busy jobs. We all have plenty of things to do. We've got killer deadlines, personal projects that might have priority, at least to ourselves. Nobody really has too much room to become a guinea pig. Now, you could ask for help for volunteers for a third time. This is going to feed your laggards later on. I mean, if things go belly up, they're going to start nagging. It's like, yeah, you see, nobody was waiting for this, you know. What did we do? We reached out, and using the profiles from the adoption chart, they knew they needed someone respected that had a reputation of being an early adopter. Also someone that communicated well and had a propensity of being a bit of a show-off, albeit a well-liked one. Bear in mind that introverts are usually not your best choice when it comes to championing things, usually, not always. So by selling this as, we have selected you to try out this new device, they made the person feel valued and special. It was emphasized how his judgment had helped and impacted the organization previously, and that was in fact true. And because it was a direct question, you really couldn't hide behind the rest the way you could when responding to or not responding to a general question. So he agreed, and being the critical adopter he was, he tried it out, he tested a couple of things, and he started to work with it. And then after a very short while, as was hoped, he started showing off about it. Are you still typing your username and password every time? And then with a flourish, he would whip out his badge and show his colleagues how easy it was and how much time he saved using this new device. Now, very quickly after that, ICT started getting requests for this as well. And within months, more than 3/4 of the workforce had adopted it. Statistically, that means everyone without laggards, maybe a quarter of your late adopters, but that is pretty good. Because of this one guy, or you might choose a couple, but this is the guy you're going to need. It might not be your kind of guy, maybe he's a little too loud, doesn't matter. This is the guy you're going to need within the organization. And simply, he used it because it worked. And because it worked, he became a champion, which then made him look good. This is how people work. Now, this will be the last quote I'll be stealing for today, and it's by Al Pacino in Devil's Advocate, to be pronounced with a wide grin. Vanity is definitely my favorite sin. Thank you very much for your attention. If there are any questions or remarks, I would obviously love to hear them.
Thank you very much, Hendrik. Interesting perspectives in any case. Great to see that. Yeah, I think to a large extent what I noticed that you were pointing at is marketing. So it's basically how to promote a product, a service, a good, or identity. The same model applies over and over again. Mm-hmm. The question is, of course, how to do it in a way that that really attracts people, and also how to make sure that you can spend enough time and effort in making that happen. So in trying to get people to accommodate and to be open also to this type of marketing of basically a security item. And I think it's yeah. So I'll just finish off this, and because I think it's basically where you started off saying, okay, I didn't like to be followed, monitored. I didn't like a phone. I think that's probably the case for most people in the audience, especially people with a sort of a security background. I have a tendency to believe that everybody who is dealing with security or managing security or trying to implement security, they are by definition paranoid, because they obviously know what can actually happen. I'm slightly more open to that space, because once you start to understand that you are being traced and followed all over the place, then, well, what the heck? So yeah, there's still something that you can do about it, but you have to realize that it's going to be a fading thing. So the question I think here is, if you would consider this this concept, and if you would consider that it's really difficult to get people to accept things like security, even those who are knowledgeable about it or those who don't actually even care. So either one. What is the best way, according to you, to get them to understand why it actually could be useful for them? So, and maybe also taking the two extremes. So those who know and care, they might need to be informed and educated and given the right tools to become either innovators or early growers at the right point in time. And what is that right point in time? And then specifically the ones that yeah, basically don't care. So they try to avoid any sort of rule, as you were also mentioning with the smokes. So how do you get those people to walk in line? Because by definition, they're not really anxious to walk in line.
I think the main difference here with classical marketing of new things is that when it comes to security, if people are not going to adopt it and use it, it's going to get shut down fundamentally. And that is why it's very important to invest in this. And ironically, this is something that we have not been investing in as much as we previously have. Now, when it comes to getting people on board, and then specifically talking about the laggards, as I said, there's not a one size fits all response to that. You're going to have to go almost to the individual level and find out why people are resisting. If somebody has a vested interest to sometimes even a criminal extent, to the extent to the extent of access that he has within an organization, and he is really not prepared to adapt to this and actively resist this and behaving very toxic within the organization, it has happened in the past, and I'm very sure I'll see it happening in the future as well, that sometimes you have to remove this person from the organization. Now, this is something that we obviously want to avoid at all costs. But if they're the source of the problem and they are not willing to adapt and they're going to resist security, then they are going to damage your organization more than they're going to help it, and you're going to have to make hard decisions. However, you should first try everything else before you do that. Because the motivation somebody has to resist or be annoying might be from something very irrational, might not be a good reason. Maybe there is a very good reason. Maybe the new access rules that he has are simply not sufficient, but you're going to have to find that out. That's a lot of work. But the success of your project and the way it is going to help your organization move forward greatly depends on that. And there are several ways of doing it. I mean, there's general information communication. Some people are obsessive about details, and they're only going to be very happy when they know everything in and out of it, how a decision was made, how this works for them, why their colleague has different access rights, and why that decision was made. And that is going to be very tiresome, but these are usually people that use that same in-depth criticism in the job that they have, and it's a good character trait most of the time, but not when adopting new change. And I'm the exact opposite of that as a person. So for me, that's always a very hard one to get to people. Like, why do you want to know this? But I want to be comforted. Some people are comforted by knowing everything. Some people are comforted by a senior
Knowing
colleague or a
nothing.
friend saying this works. But you have to come across a certain obstacle of wanting to get that information as well with some people.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are very resisting new information very hard because they don't want to learn. And then you use playful things to work with. There are all kinds of digital VR adult games, as they're called, grown-up games, serious gaming, that was the name,
Okay.
which is fundamentally different from adult gaming.
Yes.
Serious gaming, to let them play around with the new concept and confront them with what is happening when they're not doing that. So some people might need a playful way, some people need to be informed, some people need to train, but you're going to have to go very in depth in this last group to keep them on board. And at the very last resort, if somebody is maliciously hindering it, then they're damaging more than they're doing good, and then at some point you're just going to have to say goodbye to them.
Yeah, or at least isolate them. I would guess maybe you cannot get rid of them quite that easily for such a reason. I think that will be tough. I haven't seen anybody being fired for not using their identity system, but yeah, maybe it could,
I have.
Okay.
Quite recently, even I saw 2 people at a client being laid off because they consistently refused to adhere.
Yeah, I think then there's likely to be many other reasons in combination of this as well.
It's usually not only that, yes.
Yeah, because my guess is that, and to be honest, I mean, we've also seen it happening in quite a number of circumstances. You have the resistance definitely of people who are becoming, I'd say, maybe a little bit more of age, that say, well, okay, I have another 3 to 5 years to go. I don't really want to become, let's say, to live into the new normal even today. And so don't even ask me to go into a webinar meeting or something of a kind, because I simply refuse to do so. And the same applies for other digital means. But those people, like you see sometimes in factories, they are taking quite significant roles because they have a lot of experience. They've been working there for 20, 30 years. So I think it's a little bit in relation to what you were just mentioning, but Chris is, who's one of our guests here, is asking, is it worthwhile investing much time in convincing laggards when more than 80, and I guess percent, that Chris means, of your organization is on board? And I think you already answered the question, but I'll just let you react to it once more.
I think it would depend on who these laggards are.
Yeah. The usual answer of a consultant.
Ah, for shame. I'm being consultant shamed here. It would depend. To be more specific.
Let's give Chris some tips. What does he need to do? Give him 2 to 3 tips. So could it, for instance, be a good idea to take those people on a serious game experience and just trying to indicate to them?
Again, you'd first have to find out who these 20% are. Is it a very dispersed group that's crossed around all the levels and departments of the organization? Then I would say it's not that much of a problem. There's maybe 1 guy in management, there's 10 guys in production, and it's spread out. And then that might be asserting itself, or you might lean on the middle management to get those people specifically across, and they usually know very well how to approach these people. They've been working with them for years, so depends on the level above to get those across, but you're going to have to find out who that is. If it turns out that this 20% of the organization that is lagging is one particular department, then you have a problem, and then you're going to have to find a specific way to appeal to these people in a way that you haven't appealed before. Like, why is finance department just saying something? Not that they're very obtrusive, they're usually rather tech savvy, but why would, for instance, finance department refuse to do this? Maybe you have been selling it to them in a language that didn't appeal to them, or maybe the new rules are really bad for the way they are working, and then you're really going to have to dig into that. And there's not one way, again, to do that, but I think that the most important answer to this question would be find out who this 20% is. If it's dispersed, then you don't have too much of a problem. If it's one department or two departments, you really have to go look into that and dig deeper. I think you're still muted, Ulrich.
It's because there's some roadworks happening here next to me, and I'll try to avoid that noise. So I hope it's not disturbing too much. Yes, I think in this case, the good thing about an identity system or about the things that we are talking about here is the fact that we will quickly find out who's not using it or abusing it or not using it in the right way or the way that it has been intended to do so. I think so Chris is answering that further qualifying the group sounds like a good general approach, and he thanks you for the suggestion. What we've tried to do is try to take some of those people indeed on board also in some ideas such as the serious gaming as you suggest as well. We sometimes have laggards when it comes down to incident management, and typically those are laggards from higher up management. So if you are facing a serious cybersecurity incident and you have basically the sales organization that simply refuses to acknowledge the fact that they are transmitting data through channels that they are not supposed to do, and then you try to confront them with what an incident really looks like and who the hackers have been that try to get into your organization, then they open up at least a little bit. So that type of desktop type of tabletop exercise sometimes works. But I was wondering whether you had some other suggestions, maybe in terms of specific types of promotion, specific types of wording that could have also been the case.
I was thinking about something else really, because there's promotion, there's communication, there's marketing techniques, and there's also tech toys. And while we're dealing with people, ironically,
while you're talking about adult games, you can as well talk about tech toys.
Again, not exactly what I mean. But for instance, I remember a while ago an organization that where the biggest problem was actually somebody within the board of directors, one of the absolute high-ups within the organization, that kept on showing very risky online behavior. So his surfing had caused problems in the past, and he had access to everything. So this was actually a serious problem. And instead of investing too much on communication, because they really had the feeling that this wasn't going to get through, they just bought a technological solution, a Fireglass solution, I believe it was called, where the person would from that point on surf using the infrastructure of a security company, and basically his screen would be what he saw. But downloading would happen in the data center of the security provider, surfing would happen over there, and then it would all be relayed back to him. So whenever he would open something dangerous, an attachment or even email, it was opened at the data center of the security provider and analyzed to full security. And even actual downloading was not really downloading, and it worked, and he's still working like that, and he doesn't even know it's happening to him. So sometimes you have to be a little passive aggressive about that.
That's a very smart approach. I think it's what I said. It's you can call it isolation in another way than just getting rid of people, but I think that makes perfect sense. These technologies exist for those types of purposes. So you could have administrators and people with rights that know what they're doing. But if you get those types of resists, then at least it makes sense to help them in another way. It's basically maybe pampering them, but still we'll get somewhere.
It's pretty expensive though.
Yeah, but if you can keep it limited to that 20% of your organization, then I think it might
Indeed,
be.
Indeed, it's a per person solution.
There you go. All right, Hendrik, we're closing to the end of our show here today. Thank you very much for your contributions. Thanks a lot for assisting us with the webinars and with sharing your experience and your expertise. I think it's been definitely useful because in any case, while we are still continuing to move towards digital, this is also one of those specific games that we cannot underestimate how important it is. And specifically also the transfer to digital is in the same context. So it's really how can we support people, support our workforce, but also our customers in understanding why, in this case, digital or transforming into digital is important, and why we need to support it. Still keeping in mind, of course, that the humans behind it are still human and need to be supported in all of their activities and assets. But I think trying to get people to come across and to see that they are that they will need to figure out that there is something which is called the new normal, especially more today than any time before, is also giving some good thoughts on your approach here to identity and access. So with this, I would say thanks again for this, and let's also look already to next week. And we'll have one of our colleagues from Excellent Tracks joining in and talking about one of his main topics on governance. So now that we have a bit of an understanding how we can get people to acknowledge, we should maybe take it back into how to ensure that the people that are in here are also doing the things that they need to do, and that we can still manage that properly. So governance in identity and access, also of course in taking that into consideration from the current situation that we're in, where most of those systems are moving into cloud or have moved into the cloud. So I think that's a major change that we are definitely seeing, and hopefully that will then. So this was the previous one. Today I'm going to continue with another webinar at noon, where I invite you all in. So people that are all working also in data protection, in maybe also with or within at the DPO office, watching over GDPR, e-privacy, and other types of regulations popping up. I definitely invite you to join in on some of the best practices that our colleagues from the Netherlands of the Centrum voor Informatie, Bescherming and Privacy have been working with over the last couple of years. Sharing also some thoughts on where they see the biggest challenges from their members and their associates, and what typically pops up when they have to deal with the Dutch DPA. So a couple of those things will definitely happen. And then in the next couple of weeks, we'll be talking about ISO 27000 in relation to GDPR, the extensions there, and how to truly manage it. We already had a couple of interesting talks on managing this properly, but still. And then the week after, we'll have somebody from the Belgian DPA, specifically on the incident commission, talking about some of the activities and incidents that happened over the last year, amongst other the incident in relation to segregation of duties, which is another good reason why identity and access should be put in place. And then next week, we'll still need to figure out if that's going to work, but in any case, we'll have another couple of interesting talks. Inti, one of the best hackers in the world, will be talking about some of the latest vulnerabilities. Might be that it's going to be a week deferred, but still watch closely to what we'll be communicating today. And then later on that day, we'll be talking about challenges in relation to how to discover your assets within your organization together with Landsweeper, and how to manage those assets securely, but also how to properly manage them in terms of knowing what types of activities are happening on top of that. So that's about it from our side today. Thanks all again for joining in. Hendrik, also to you and to the colleagues from PWC, thanks a lot for taking an early morning coffee together with us, and hope you stay safe, even with a larger bubble of 10, or I don't think we can even call it bubbles anymore, but let's say at least to keep it safe and secure going forward in the next couple of months.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a nice day.